Hey guys, Veebat here with another V-Plays, and we're taking out the P-38. Now this isn't the American P-38 at Tier 5 and 6, however it is still going to be a heavy with a combination of a cannon and some machine guns in the forward hemisphere, and some pretty robust air-to-ground ordnance. At this tier, you're limited to only 3 possible heavies now with the introduction of this airframe. The normal grind would bring you to the Focke-Wulf 5.7, and then immediately after that you do have the option of purchasing the DOE 17Z7. And now that is going to be a converted bomber that carries a 20 as well as a combination of machine guns in the forward hemisphere as well, but they're very limited on maneuverability, and the reload on their air-to-ground ordnance is going to be extremely limited. We're talking 300 and 200 seconds respectively. Now they definitely carry a lot more oomph on that initial bomb load with 6 and 4 bombs between the two, but this carrying a single very large 300 kilogram bomb sports a 120-second reload, which means it's more consistent, and by the time you get to your next site after dropping that single bomb, you'll either be close to finishing your reload or already finished by the time you get to the next sector, which allows you to then flip that sector as well. I actually fly this aircraft much like I do the DOE 335 at Tier 8, which is utilizing it as kind of a heavy multi-role. We get the option of dropping some ordnance, and then we can also take out aircraft, but being a heavy means that we can choose the engagements we get into as long as we maintain good energy state and stay at higher altitudes. That way we can limit the amount of aircraft that can try and counter us. There are some players on the enemy team, and one of them is actually a specialist in the BV3, which is a dangerous aircraft to say the least. We are not top tier, but it doesn't mean that we aren't still a force to be reckoned with. You'll see that I'm trying to maintain my airspeed as much as possible and making limited movements if I can avoid getting into some heavy turns. So just like there was that specialist aircraft, we didn't try and turn with him the whole time. We actually decided to go past the target and opting for a turn later on. If he decided he wanted to turn on us, we still had our momentum, and if he did decide to continue to chase our ally and straightened out, we would have an opportunity to be able to get our munitions on target. Here we were able to finish off that one target we were engaging earlier with our tail gunner. It has a very limited field of view, but that doesn't mean it isn't still effective if you can lock it in on a target. It's 2 7.62 machine guns, which at this tier is actually considered fairly substantial, since that's something you'll see used on some of the light fighters and as their primary armament. I was going to go back for that other ground attacker, but I do see that there's an I-16 down here, and I believe that that was another player aircraft as well. Again, there's that ground attacker, the BSH-2, and what I'm getting here is my initial hits are coming in the form of the machine guns making contact, not the big 20. This is something I've mentioned many times before when it comes to mixed armament loadouts. You want to make sure that the highest caliber gun is the one making contact. The other guns are there to just augment the damage, so let that bigger caliber gun do the lion's share of the work, and then let those other guns overlap as you start to close on the target, or their departure rate starts to decrease, or the rate at which they're going across your field of view. So we are now trying to climb up to this bomber. It wasn't until about this point I started to realize that there was already a heavy aircraft chasing it down, but as you can see here, the climb rate is not that good, but that's not really a knock on this aircraft. All of the tier 3 heavies have some issues when it comes to climb rates, so all in all, it's still a very reasonable performer, which is another reason why I like to maintain my airspeed, and I like to maintain my altitude if I can. If I am going to sacrifice my altitude for some airspeed, I'm going to make sure that I try and get it back in the form of altitude. Like right there, we started the dive to try and help defend this zone, realizing that that zone had just flipped over to the Red's side. We went ahead and lifted our nose back up to have the momentum carry us back up to a safe altitude. Same thing here, we're dropping down trying to get to some opportunistic fire on that BSH. Again, only the machine guns hitting, unfortunately. But by maintaining our speed, we're able to outpace that little biplane that was trying to give chase to us. I'm going to use this thing, like I said, much like a multi-role. We're already heading over to this other garrison. Our air-to-ground ordnance is more than reloaded at this point, and we were able to do pretty much the full site's worth of damage from that single drop. And we are also going to be helping the team out by knocking out this ground attacker. There, our bomb just hit the target, and that's what caused this zone to be able to flip. Now we're on a BF-110 Bravo. This is a tier 4 heavy, comes immediately after the Focke-Wulf 5.7, and it actually is a little bit more robust of an airframe compared to us, but either it's stock or it's just playing a little bit odd here because we're able to maintain chase. You can see the guns are starting to overheat, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping those guns nice and cool. We're letting ourselves catch back up. Good news, the 110 just flew into the zone of the airfield, which allowed us to be able to pick up grade 3 heavy fighter. It allowed us to get much closer to finishing the capture the zone, and using the momentum and speed and that really far reach of the 20mm cannon, we were able to knock out that PV3, and now we can move on to the next sector if we so choose. There is a Focke-Wulf 5.7 up here, however, and I do want to try and counter this aircraft, which this airframe does fairly well. Now, the Focke-Wulf 5.7 does have a 20mm cannon in the tail, which means that he has nearly the same amount of damage we have in the forward hemisphere and the rear hemisphere, but by alternating our fire between the machine guns and the main cannon, we're able to keep consistent fire, and since we're much more maneuverable, we can stay locked in on them and keep a good bead on the target. And we just managed to pick up grade 2 heavy fighter, which is no small feat at tier 3. We're just about reloaded on that air-to-ground ordnance, which should help us flip the zone, but these biplanes at this tier, like I said, nearly standing still, and you can see when we finally got the 20s into that sweet spot against that airframe. We caused some pretty good damage to that airframe, but we're not overcommitting. We're going to use our altitude to get us on target. Overshot a little bit, but managed to get the reticle back on towards the end there. Nearly captured the zone, and with the help of my player in the P-43, he was able to weaken that biplane, and then once we finish it off, we just got air supremacy, which means the match is pretty much over at this point. Usually I don't like to get air supremacy, but I'm not sure I even realized it was happening at the time, but we still managed to bring in some pretty impressive numbers, so I was more than happy with the results. We do have that Focke-Wulf 5.7 coming back in, and again, trying to get that 20 to make contact at range. You can see it's doing some pretty good work here, but bear in mind, guys, if someone's in a heavy fighter and you're in a light fighter, you actually owe it to them to try and stay out of their way. Not because of the class of aircraft, but because of the level of maneuverability. I can't avoid you as easily as you can avoid me, and he was actually approaching from my blind spot. So just some normal flight etiquette for those of you out there that were wondering who should have right of way in those situations. It would be the least maneuverable platform. Anyways, let's get back to the hangar and draw some more comparisons. Alright, so all in all, a pretty solid performance from this little aircraft. Now, there are other tier 3 heavies that are probably, well, there's only one tier 3 heavy that's comparable, and that's actually going to end up being the Focke-Wulf 5.7. The Focke-Wulf 5.7 sporting 2 20mm cannons is quite the contender. And then we do have the DOE 17Z7, which is a premium. Let's go ahead and pull up the stats of both of these airframes and compare them real quick to what we get with the P-38 Wilk. Now with the P-38 Wilk, we are going to have less gun armament in the form of only having a single 20, opposed to the two 20s with the Focke-Wulf 5.7, and of course the DOE 17Z has a single 20 but 3 machine guns to accompany it, which gives it just that little bit of an edge when it comes to the overall damage performance compared to the P-38, but functionally you could easily argue that the Focke-Wulf 5.7 has much more consistent firepower with the two 20mm cannons and much better range. Now, let's go ahead and compare some things that really are going to be a huge factor here. All of these aircraft can carry air-to-ground ordnance, and the Focke-Wulf 57 carries a very impressive 6-bomb load that can do a total of 12,600 damage with its internal carry configuration, which means it's not limiting any of the airspeed, which is an important thing to bear in mind. But its resupply time is absolutely horrendous. You're looking at 300 seconds. That is a very long time, guys. You're looking at about 5 minutes. 5 minutes of reload time. Now, it's better, but it's not much better when you look at the DOE 17 Z7, because you're looking at a total of 200 seconds. And while it is only carrying 4 of the bombs instead of 6, and they are, again, internal carried, so there's no reason not to take them, you really just kind of get in a one-hit wonder here. You can go in and help flip that initial zone, and maybe you can make another attempt later on in the battle, but it's not something you can really rely on. Meanwhile, the P-38 Wilk is looking at a 120-second reload. A 120-second reload is on par with kind of the average multi-role reload time, and that is going to be considered very effective, especially at the speeds these aircraft are traveling at Tier 3. You'll have that bomb back up and running in no time. In addition to that, you're looking at essentially a nuke. Like, this thing is a monster bomb at this tier. 4,500 damage. And let's go ahead and pull up the actual stats of the munition itself real quick. And we'll also do the same for this SC-100 just so we can get a side-by-side comparison. The blast radius alone is nearly 50 feet larger with this 300 kilogram bomb. On top of that, you're looking at over double the damage coming off this munition. So when I drop that, I know it's taking out a standard sight in a single drop. Easy. And it'll come back later. So it's truly a fire and forget. I drop this thing, I just forget about it, I finish capturing the zone, get to the next zone, oh, bomb's reloaded. Let's go ahead and rinse and repeat. So that is going to be a huge claim to fame with this aircraft, and you can even see, look how large that is sitting underneath the aircraft. Now, speaking of large, you see the size of this aircraft? Look at the size of the Focke-Wulf 57. Absolutely huge target, big hitbox. The DOE 17 Z7, not much better. Big wings, lots of surface area to be able to take out. But with the P-38 Wilk, you're looking at what I mistakenly called a multi-role initially. I thought it was a multi-role. I did not realize it was a heavy fighter when I first purchased it, so go figure. Now, we've talked about the guns, we've talked about the bombs, but here's where things get a little bit tricky. You saw us going up against another Focke-Wulf 57, and you can see here that while our cruise speed and our boost speed, they're not spectacular, and we don't necessarily have the best dive speed either, we were able to stick on them. And we can see here when it comes to the maneuverability, this is where it really comes into play. You're looking at a 16-second turn time for each of these things with absolutely abysmal roll rates. Their optimum speed for turning is very high, which means that for this aircraft, with its optimal maneuvering speeds being a much wider gate, and with a 13.5 second turn time and a high roll rate, this allows it to behave a lot better than these other two airframe do. Now, we're going to go on down here to the altitude performance. And again, the altitude performance we're lacking compared to these other aircraft, but we have a comparable rate of climb, which allows us to be able to stick with these aircraft and maintain decent acceleration to be able to get guns on target. It's really the maneuverability that kind of tips this aircraft over the scales in my eyes. And that single 20mm cannon does do some pretty substantial work, and it has been proving quite a joy to fly, actually. In fact, I'm probably going to say that this will quickly replace the Focke-Wulf 57 as my favorite low-tier mission daily mission grinder, because having the ability to consistently get performance out of this air-to-ground ordnance is really where it's going to come into play. Now, we don't have the same type of tail gunner as the Falcon 57 with a 20mm cannon, but we do have dual 7.62 machine guns, which is essentially what we get in the forward hemisphere minus the 20mm cannon. And since I'm able to retrain this for any nationality, I get to put in any tail gunner arrangement that I want in here, or any pilot. So I could put in my B-32 tail gunner if I wanted to. I could put in my, what do I want to say? We could put in here our I-215 pilot if we wanted to. We could throw in our Japanese JU or J7W2 pilot. It's up to you, because again, you can retrain the nationality, and of course we've retrained it to Russian because it allows us to be able to put in some of our tail gunners and get some training going on those airframes as well. So anyways, that pretty much concludes the P-38 Wilk. A little bit more talking about an aircraft that I thought I wasn't going to be spending a lot of time on, since it is just tier 3, but I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and this neat little bird that kind of pops in as a cool gem at tier 3. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you on the next one.